So I'm trying to break this talk down into three parts. The first is, what is the context that where we make design happen, and that context is not just a sort of physical context, but a context actually, I called it conceptual context here, but this is actually our Constitution, or it's a summary of our Constitution, written by Richard Rogers back in 1990. And what it does is it defines our role, our responsibilities as architects generally, how we should manage our practice, and very importantly, our practice is actually owned by charity. There's no ownership, naked in, naked out. And then what we should do if we make money, where should that go? And we give a lot of that to charity. So that sets a sort of context that actually then is, of course, reflected in the design. As architects, of course, we're about space, making space. So, of course, our studio, that's obvious, really is a reflection of what we are and what we want to be about ourselves. As a practice, it's not just architects, it's a broad group. And all of these people are essential in that operation. So, as one of the partners, leaders of this organisation, actually you owe it to all of these individuals really to help them achieve, and also to always drive and strive for a better future. And the teamwork itself, and something we've always advocated as a practice, is that it's not just about the architect, it's about a broader team, it's about engineers, it's about specialists, not being brought in at the last possible moment, but actually from the outset. We can create nothing without that broader team. It goes back to this thing about our responsibilities and that broad role we have as practitioners. The collaboration within the practice itself, the idea, every practice will say we're collaborative, but there is something, and that's the title of the talk, is conductor. It's an orchestra here. It has people that play fantastic instruments, and they play them very well, much better than the conductor, and people that write the score. Sometimes the conductor writes the score, or some of the score. So although it's collaboration, it does need decision-making and direction. You can't have a random orchestra just doing everything and hope to generate something exciting. It would work, I guess, statistically, eventually, but the conductor is a really important part of that. And the most amazing conductor I've ever met is Richard Rogers. Absolutely extraordinary. No one approached him. And actually, his great ability was his inability to do some of the other things. So his ability as the conductor was supreme. The mindset about developing design and the ability sort of to evolve with a rolling process of reinvestigating as you move through it. You often have a hunch of what might be right. You usually spend the next 6 months going around in rolling circles. You end up back where you were, but you've tested that design. And I think, again, just listening to the data thing, this is data, it's just a PDF of a drawing. Multiple hands are on that drawing, and that is a design process that's just written down there, and that's important because it's really demonstrated evolution. It's not a precious thing. But it's become more precious since the building has been realised. The experience, and I can say this now because I've been doing it for actually quite a long time. Experience. I've just been to see the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg 30 years ago. Next year, 30 years complete. I did it when I was 27. My goodness. And I thought I knew it all then. I know nothing or very little, but I think that experience is quite useful in the end to refer back to, just to help others, to guide others from that experience. Not by saying, don't do it like that, I did it like that, and it all went horribly wrong. It's just you sort of bring in you're able to support with some sort of tacit knowledge about, you might begin to know what you're talking about by the time you retire. Repetition, poetry, the sort of rhythm of buildings, I think, is super important. Buildings are background in the most part, and their rhythm is super important. We're so lucky in London to have Georgian London, Victorian London. That sort of rhythmic background, super important. When I do competitions and we're being told, you've got to jazz it up a bit and make it all another animal in the zoo, I find it so depressing because you can't create a city without background.
I think some people think of leaders as the one who sort of, has the visionary ideas, maybe holds the pen, does the talking, stands on stage for the longest, so on and so forth. Clara is kind of none of those things. Some of you might also think that there's got to be a difference between design leadership and climate leadership, but they're both forms of leadership. So what can we learn from groups like this and people like this? My contention is that there are two aspects to a leader that we could aspire to be more like. A leader must act, and a leader must work to help others to thrive. So if we take Clara as an example of this, when she, to her, she saw the world in black and white, right? Obviously, plastic bags are a bit of a silly idea once you understand how they're made and the fact they last forever. We just shouldn't have them. Obviously, this loophole in planning needed closing. She was surrounded by people who insisted that the world was more grey than this. People who wanted to say, yes, but what if? Isn't this going to cost us money? Hasn't somebody tried it before? Surely we would have done it by now if it was obvious. Barrier, barrier, barrier. She just sort of shunned that and got on with it and acted. And when she acted, it was never about herself, right? It was always about enabling other people to do their job well. Going back to the idea of a conductor, enabling the people around them to play their instruments well. This is what Letty was always about. This is what her work was always about. And I think we can learn from that. So, action and helping others to thrive. We completely rewrote our approach to giving out these structural awards, and we formed it around these 4 attributes. And now when projects are entered every year, we judge those projects on their own merit. It doesn't matter whether they fit into a category about being tall or long or whatever. What matters is what they have done to the world as a result. And that's all that really matters with our buildings, right? Is what's the impact at the end of the day? What's the impact on people? What's the impact on the planet? Has this somehow impacted the process that we take for granted around design and construction for the better? And how has it impacted on the profession? This is called Holborn Gardens. It's here in the middle of London. And it's, to many, it just appears like quite a modest building. What's special about it is twofold. The first thing is that the top story, which was the only new bit of the building, the rest of it's a refurbishment, the top story is framed out with reused or reclaimed steel beams. So not recycled ones, not steel that's been melted, turned into new steel, reclaimed. So these are beams that have been cut out of a building, taken away, cleaned up, recertified, and built using. So everything the engineers on this, Hayne Tillett Steel, everything they did, they then passed on to their competitors, to their collaborators across the industry. Everything they learned about reusing steel, they wrote up, they put it in guidance, they put it in presentations, they made tools, and they put it all on the internet so that their competitors could then do a bigger and better version next time, because they knew that that was the sort of action that needed to be taken if this industry is going to move forward towards a circular economy at anywhere near the pace that's required. But I'm also proud of it because this is the biggest collaborative project I've ever worked on in my life. This had more than 400 people feeding into it. You won't be surprised to hear that Plastic Bag Shunning Clara was involved from the start. And it's never been about one firm, right? This is not the iStruct standard. UK GBC never said it's got to be the UK GBC standard. It was always going to be written by the industry for the industry, and it's much, much stronger as a result.
A lot of wisdom with all the systems thinking also from the leadership point of view. How can we actually create adaptive organizations in this type of situation? How can we actually work in smaller systems so that we create value to the wider system and kind of share the leadership as well instead of the traditional one? So how can we actually function better as a system? And that really needs a different kind of leadership and also different kind of discussion on not just processes but interactions. Well, how do we actually work together? So it's these type of things. This is the organizational part, but then we are all humans, and I think when we get scared, stressed, we concentrate on the small things and not discuss on the right things. And this sort of how do we create urgency, the feeling of urgency without fear. And this is a lot about this psychological safety. And we are all responsible of creating this right kind of atmosphere to be able to encourage our colleagues, partners, whoever to really ask these questions that 5-year-old could ask. So I think that's the very simple things. How do we actually react if someone says something controversial or new or something difficult? So I think it's something for everyone to think.
Doing a Dragon's Den of innovation for inviting our colleagues at any of any position, any discipline, to make proposals as to how we can better embed nature into our building design, and not putting any limits on sort of what that might end up looking like, but just really inviting sort of that co-creation between colleagues, because we don't have the answer. And I think that goes to that question. If our thinking is part of the problem, how do we change our thinking? And surely it's by including other people in the conversation or making the conversation different. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about in terms of leadership and groups is that rather than focusing on a single voice being the leader or being correct, that you work as a group and you welcome awkward perspectives to the conversation.
When we were curating this session, we were thinking about whether designers have any role, architects, engineers, designers have any role in designing the leadership structure of the future, of our social structures. Of course, this morning, we were talking about even the justice that we are all striving to have, whether it's environmental or social. Do you think us as engineers, architects, have something to offer in that context, or should we just sort of stay where we are with core competence and things like that?
I think, certainly our profession, the space we work is very public, and I think we do have a lot to offer, and I think we're always actually disappointed by the reluctance of particularly architects to step forward. The representation in government is virtually non-existent, and I think Richard was probably unique in the latter part of the last century, the beginning of this century, in actually being an architect that was engaged in the inevitable politics. And it's only through, unfortunately, being engaged at that level, which is called political, I think that you can effect any change. He was constantly frustrated by it, and I have to say, I think he always felt he could do with some help. The help was never forthcoming. I think we do have a tendency, and that's been mentioned more than once this afternoon, that if we feel a bit anxious, we go back to what we know. I think certainly the complexity of what we're involved with should give us those tools. As a little anecdote, we did a project with the special forces. Or rather, they wanted to do a project, and we advised them. And after going away, we didn't get involved. They came back and said, we've done all the most impossible things in the world, but we couldn't get this project to work. How on earth do you work as in this profession and get stuff to happen? So I do think we're capable of it. We're not aware of it, and it probably is a case of it's just you have it as a different mindset that you have to engage with through that place, that system.
If you've got any scale of ambition to change things, you'll always feel like you're being held back by something, and therefore the only thing you could ever do is to speak up when you're not being asked to speak up. And that architectural firm, what they ended up doing was they wrote a standard clause into their terms and conditions that says at the start of every project, no matter when they get appointed, they insist on running a questioning the brief workshop with the client, and the client has to attend. They don't have to take on board any of their suggestions whatsoever. They do it as a sort of fun afternoon where they all come down and they tear the project to pieces and say, well, what else could we have done? And then they leave it at that. And they said that since they've started doing it, the amount of their repeat clients who phone them that little bit earlier and say, come in for a coffee, has definitely gone up. So I think, speak up when you're not being invited to.